Okay, I want to explain hybrid models, virtual only, and mainly from the perspective in a different viewpoint from the parents, for the parents that are choosing those models, because you sort of got to understand where that ties into a free and appropriate public education. And we got to start first definitively, and I've said this, I'm going to say it again, that the school system has 100% of the duty to provide your child with a free and appropriate public education. They're the ones with the legal duty, not you. Okay, your duty as a parent is different. Your duty is to show up, participate, provide consent, and you are in a very strong position in that you are 50% of the decision-making process. And what does that mean? That means that once your IEP is developed, then it's consensus at the end. And if you do not agree, and you absolutely definitively believe that whatever the school is proposing and wanting to implement in the body of that IEP is going to damage your child educationally, meaning that your child will not tangibly progress, or they've changed your child's placement to where it's going to be a damaging impact on them, then at that point, consensus hasn't been reached. And that then triggers the requirement by the parent to file due process, request mediation, file a state complaint. You just can't sit there and say, well, you guys can't implement the IEP because we don't have consensus. No, that's not how that works. They can implement the IEP you disagree with. What it means is that there requires to be consensus, meaning that you are now in the legal position to go file and trigger one of the many dispute resolution options in order to get those things that you disagree with changed, meaning your child is not removed from their environment, or aspects of their services are beefed up, or some aspects taken out that you disagree with that could be or would be damaging. Now, you have a 2-year statute of limitations. So in most states, North Carolina and Texas are the two that I am familiar with that cut it down to 1 year. And so it's 2 years in most other in the majority of the states. All right, which means that from where you disagree, that would start the clock. Okay. So let's say that you have an IEP that you disagree with. Let's say move it into this new school year, and they sit there and they tell you, well, we're going to do this hybrid model, and your child's only going to be able to go to school 2 days a week, and then do virtual the other couple days. At that point, if you sit there and you go, that's not FAPE for my child. My child needs, a full litany of services and intervention. And the school comes back and says, no, we can't do that. We won't do that. And if you choose not to file due process or mediation at that point, okay, you don't have to. What I'm saying is you can sit there and let that ride. And it could turn out to where your child progresses. I mean, it's a gamble. It could turn out that your child progresses. But if your child does not, and your child's regressing, or your child is stagnant, hasn't made progress, then you understand that in January or this coming April, you would then be in a position to file due process based upon that decision that was made now. Okay? And that's what that statute of limitations means, that you can sit there and just sort of take a wait and see approach. And many parents do that. And I'm not saying that, that's completely up to you. All right? Some parents are going to sit there and say, damn it, James, I've had enough. I was patient and cool with what happened in the spring. I was totally understanding. Everybody knew that my child was not benefiting from distant learning. And if I just sort of take a wait and see approach through the fall, that's potentially 6 months, guys. First 9 weeks would be 6 freaking months. Half of a year without in-person services for some of our kids that desperately need it. half of a year that you can't get back. So, I mean, you got to make that decision as a parent on how much of this crap you're going to tolerate. But if you're one of those that you know, because of whatever, scared, you have concerns. I mean, there's a lot of inconsistencies out there. I get why parents are cautious about jumping back into the school environment. And even though the CDC came out with, and the Association for Pediatrics came out with their recommendations that we should reopen schools and, you know, following safe practices and how low risk children are with regards to the virus and even spreading it to adults. We know the science, but what gets me is that in our environment today, because the science has been so inconsistent, it has. I mean, it's amazing. Some of you I know are sitting there saying, well, why would the CDC say that? Because just a few weeks ago, you were hammering your pro-Trump friends over the head about what the CDC said, you know, with regards to masks or whatever. And now the CDC saying something that agrees with Trump about reopening, which, by the way, they're not friends. You know, they are typically at odds with each other. And quite frankly, I want my science and I want my government officials not to see eye to eye all the time. That's a dangerous, dangerous game. They're two different professions. And so each should stay in their lane. You know, because I'm not one of these believers that using the scientific method, that we should be basing all governmental policy decisions based upon the scientific method, which is what medical science should be using. And we're too soon into this, guys. I mean, we've only been going through this since March. And in the world of scientific research and scientific data, that is not a long time. And that is why all this data, the epidemiological models and all of those things have been, you know, wrong, because we don't have enough data, you know, and we're still learning so much about this virus to the point that we're saving more people than we were in March when we didn't know that much about it. So it is an evolving process using the scientific method of testing, data collection, consensus, and repeating and repeating and repeating those things. So, you know, I can see where parents are frustrated by the inconsistency, but understand why. And that's why I always take caution that government decisions all the time don't need to be tied to that inconsistency. Different decisions need to be made. But at the same time, we have a responsibility as individuals to be responsible for ourselves and not sit there and look, you know, to the government to sit there and take care of us all the time. That's ridiculous as well. Okay? Absolutely ridiculous. And don't sit there and say, well, but I can take care of myself, but I want everybody else to be mandated. No, that's not how a republic works. I am quite sure that if you want to live in a society that is a top-down tyrannical structure, there are plenty of options in this world for you to live under. But in the United States, we have a fractured system of government, thank God, and it's in the form of a republic, and we, as a citizenry, get to vote on that, and there's a whole bunch of separations of power. And that's why for this health emergency, the federal government doesn't have a lot of say about this, because they don't have the police powers. That's why the state government is the one that tends to be in charge of this. And that's also why there's no consistency in how we're dealing with it, because each state is doing their data differently. Each state is calculating things differently. Each state has their own way of dealing with this. But unfortunately, we have a national media, and the national media is repeating a narrative that isn't applicable in so many different places. And it's skewing our mindset about how this should be handled. When, quite frankly, I don't want Trump to have first of all, he can't constitutionally, you know, so he can provide logistics and support, and so can Congress, and that's supposedly what they're doing, and that's what's been done. I mean, you can sit there and provide a hospital ship and respirators, and that's great. But it's the state governors and it's the state health departments that are in control of this, and that's why it varies from state to state. And then at that point, then those decisions end up filtering down to our local school boards and the decisions that they're making. Okay, so let's get into this into these models. Free and appropriate public education rests solely on the backs of the school system. And so at that point, if you live in a let me go ahead and say this real quick. I listened to a interview that the senator from Alabama, Doug Jones, did with the state superintendent, Mackey, out of Alabama. Now, Alabama has a little bit different educational structure, being that by law, they've given the individual school systems a hell of a lot of control, to where the state superintendent, in some ways, is just a figurehead, can make recommendations, but cannot dictate like some of the other states and how they've structured their education departments. And so in Alabama, the local school districts have a lot of autonomy and a lot of individual control. So what I found interesting is he did say yesterday that there is no substitute for a highly qualified in-person instruction. True. And he also recommended to every school that they should be providing in-person services and in-person instruction options, and that he had instructed all schools to do that. But he said that there were 15 schools at that point yesterday that had selected to do virtual only and not follow that advice. That's very key. I want you to remember that that came out of the mouth of the state superintendent. So James is not lying to you when I'm telling you that there is no obstruction for these schools that are doing virtual only. There is no obstacle, and they have been advised by the state superintendent of Alabama that they need to provide in-person options and in-person services. And if they're going virtual only, they're wrong. You know, not that I needed validation, but it's nice to hear that I'm not the only one screaming that. But like I said, he has limited power, and it's mostly bigger school systems that are deciding to go virtual option are doing so at their own litigious legal risk. All right, because they know that they can provide children a free and appropriate public education. Not only that, is they're allowing these extracurriculars to continue and not providing access. I've even seen where some of the teachers are being allowed to bring their children up to school, but yet other children can't go. All right. Okay, state law. I'm trying to read what else he said that, oh, the other thing that I wanted to cover, well, I'll tell you what I'll do, because I want to cover at the end what potentially happens in these schools that are having in-person instruction inside these classrooms with regards to, let's say, a teacher or a student testing positive for COVID at some point, what that would do with regards to the shutdown. And he was talking about, well, I'll get to that at the end, okay? So with regards to these virtual only, I sort of discussed that yesterday or in prior videos. And let me go ahead and say that most of the schools in Alabama are doing a hybrid, in-person, or a hybrid, or a virtual option. Okay, so they're doing a mixture. Some are doing virtual only or in-person, and the parents had to choose one or the other. I understand that, but at the same time, I don't like rigidity. All right, which means that depending on the nature of the child's needs, that might not be the smart move. Okay. So I'm all about flexibility. I'm all about options. So I don't want anybody to confuse that. But let's tackle the virtual only. So the virtual only, if they're doing that and they're coming back, and some of these schools I've seen them say in news reports that yes, they've gone virtual only, but they're going to have their special education department reach out to families to create distant learning plans that would include some in-person services. I've seen that, okay, and that's some Alabama districts. So yes, they've announced virtual only, and in the big published, news reports and joint press conferences between these superintendents, let's say up in North Alabama, they never mentioned, that they were going to provide some additional in-person services. They kept that quiet. But then I saw a report where the special education director for a specific school district up there that was part of the joint press conference came out and said, well, once school starts or once teachers return, then we're going to do this mass calling to, our families and, work out these distant learning plans that could include some in-person services to where the parent would bring their child to school for services, in-person services. And, I know that some parents will go, oh, well, you see, they are providing in-person services. Guys, there's no such thing as half a FAPE. There's no such thing as a quarter of FAPE. There's no such thing as a 3/4 FAPE. A free and appropriate public education is a free and appropriate public education, and that's just what it is. So in the situation to where they're going virtual only, but then they're going to offer some in-person services, some of you may be happy with that. Some of you may go, great, that's exactly what my child needs, is just a little bit. And so those of you who don't want that and you believe that your child's gone long enough without the full litany of services, then at that point, that's not going to cut it. Partial services, partial intervention isn't going to cut it for you, okay? And so at that point, yes, you do need to fight for more. And as you can see, if they say that they're going virtual only, but then making news reports saying that they're going to be providing in-person services for some kids, once school starts inside of school, that verifies to you, and it should verify to you, that they can provide more, that they could do their full duty for FAPE, and they're deciding not to. All right, so always keep that in mind, that there is no provision in the law for sort of FAPE. There is no such thing as sort of FAPE. A little bit of FAPE. All right? Stank FAPE. Baby FAPE. I don't care what you call it. We can put it, I can make it into a t-shirt. I don't know which one you prefer. Stank FAPE, baby FAPE, sort of FAPE, little FAPE. I just want FAPE. That's all I'm asking for is free and appropriate public education. That's it. That's it. Now, so that's virtual learning. If you believe that your child requires in-person services and you're not one that has the trepidation to send your child back, if you're not fearful about that and you want your child back in school to receive those services, I'm not saying that you're not nervous. I mean, come on, guys. It'd be ridiculous for me to say that. But some of you are saying that that's what's needed and that's what needs to happen. Then at that point, that's what I just covered. Now, when it comes to those of you that are wanting that virtual option, you are not wanting to send your child back, but yet you want FAPE. Sorry, guys. FAPE is what this is. And there are going to be some of you that your child can receive a FAPE in a hybrid type of setting to where you can do some of it virtually and then some of it with in-person instruction, sort of like what I heard that special education director say. And if your child is one of those that can benefit from some in-person services, and then some virtual learning, then great. That's a great combination. Your child will progress. Bravo. I am speaking to those families out there that your child is not that kind of learner and your child requires that in-person instruction. And they won't provide it in the manner and the frequency that your child requires. They'll throw a little bit at you. Well, see, that's a problem. But if you're one of those that say that I do not want to send my child back for this reason, and the reason is because I'm going to talk about the rarity, the small sliver of students that the student themselves are medically in a high risk group. That is not a lot of kids, guys, comparative to the 7.1 million with IEPs. It's not a large population. All right, so I don't want anybody to sit there and get confused about what I'm saying. This small sliver, this small group that they themselves fit within the known high-risk groups for this respiratory virus, that would be a different analysis for them, okay? Because the medical recommendations are such, and the medical exclusions and what's being advised for them would be more akin traditionally to how we would deal with homebound, and in that situation, you know, their FAPE would, the analysis there would be a little bit different, but that also would trigger a change in placement. But please understand, in situations like that, even though this would be FAPE, because of whatever limitations exist within the medical exceptions, it would be, in so many of these situations, it would be impossible for the school system to be able to provide a true FAPE because of the medical needs and the medical limitations that are put on the school system to be able to provide the full litany of what the child requires. And so in that situation, that has to be taken into consideration. And you sit there and say, well, but my child's entitled to the same FAPE. Yes, your child is entitled to the same FAPE, but there are situations out of the school system's control due to medical limitations to where they can't provide all of those things. But they can provide this, they can provide this, they can do this, and they can think outside the box to do the best that they can within the confines of those limitations. So that's what that is, okay? Now, the mass majority of the parents that are going to be opting for virtual learning, they're doing it out of two things. One is concern, fear, out of the inconsistency of what's out there. These are their children. They don't want their children put at risk, even for whatever the 0.02% that the CDC quotes with regards to the impact on kids. I mean, it's low impact on children that are not in high risk categories. I got to put that in there. This is low risk of children, but parents make their individual decisions. Okay. All right. So let's say a parent does it. That's one. If the parent says, I'm uncomfortable, I don't want to send my child to school. Well, you have that virtual option. The second is going to be the families that within the household have high risk adults, high risk grandparents that are living within the household. And at that point, regardless of what the CDC or pediatric recommendations are, where there's a very, very low risk of child to adult transference of this, regardless of that, the family just doesn't want to put these people within the household at risk. That I understand as well, okay? And so those families also choose virtual option. But please understand that the legal duty of the school system is for the child. It doesn't take into consideration Grandpa Joe, a parent, anything like that, because they don't have a legal duty to these people. And I know that you might go, well, that's being an a-hole. That's what the law is, guys. They have a legal duty to the child that qualifies for an IEP. They have no legal duty to anybody else. Okay? So yes, tough decisions, and you might think it's inequitable, you might think it's unfair, but that's how that rolls. So the parents are making decisions based upon those two factors. If they fall into those, that virtual only is what you are desiring for those reasons. Please understand that at that point, you are the one making the choice, not the school system. If the school system is offering in-person services, and they're offering in-person services in such a way that provides your child a FAPE, and they have provided flexible options of a hybrid or a virtual only, and you choose virtual only, then at that point, please understand that the legal duty for the district is to offer you this. If you choose something other than this, when that is open and available, then at that point, it's not the school system that is diminishing your child's right to a free and appropriate public education. You are. And at that point, I don't ever want any of you to be mystified or confused by the legal standard and come back later and say, well, my child didn't progress. Because at that point, the school system's going to say, but we offered you this. You had the option to do this. You chose this. You see? And I know that a lot of you are going to go, but that's an impossible. Yes. But life isn't fair all the time, guys. I'm just telling you from a legal perspective that if this is available and this is what the school is offering to you, then at that point, if you choose, even if somebody in your family is high risk, if you choose that, then that's a parental preference that has nothing to do with the legal requirement of the school system to make those services that would make it possible for your child to receive a FAPE available. So that is something you must think about as you're heading into the next month or the next few weeks of making decisions on what you're going to do with regards to your child's program. Because the schools are going to confront you in these virtual only schools, hybrid models, to where you're going to have to sit there and make a decision. And that's going to be the decision that you're going to need to make. If you are a parent that disagrees, though, and you want your child offered the services that they require and that they are entitled to, then at that point you need to take a stand. You do not sign their documentation. And if you sign their documentation, you need to notate your disagreement on that documentation. That you believe that your child is entitled to a full FAPE, that you, and if the school system says, you need to notate somewhere that you disagree with how they're doing it. That you want more, that you want what your child's entitled to. You need to notate it on their documentation. Because they're going to go ahead and do whatever it is they're going to do, virtual learning or whatever. They may even say, oh, well, look, I was just kidding. We can do 1 day of in-person services. Was that one day of in-person services enough? No. You still need to notate your disagreement. You still need to notate on there, if they try to change the substance of your child's IEP, that you disagree. You need to do all those things. Because once again, you have your statute of limitations, which means that you need that documentation to support that you disagreed. That's your marker. This is my disagreement point. Now you can sit there and trigger it if you're in North Carolina or Texas within that year. If you're in another one, you got 2 years to sit there and trigger that you disagreed, and then the end result was a disaster. Okay? But if you want distant learning, that's a different situation, guys. If you want it, then don't complain about the district's watering down of the intervention for your child. This will pass. It will be probably another 9 weeks, maybe a semester. That'll be 3/4 of a year that your child didn't receive the services that they require. But some of you absolutely need to make that decision for, whatever decision you're making, for the safety of your family, whatever. I respect that. My job is to sit there and just give you the nitty-gritty. give it to you hard and dirty, and this is how it is. This is realism. I am not going to sit there and blow smoke anywhere in any orifice to sit there and pump you up and sit there and think that this is somehow grand and jolly. It's not. Tough decisions need to be made, but we're adults and we can do it. But don't buy this excuse from the majority of these public education entities that say that they're limited, that they can't do it, that it's a little more like they won't do it. And if they don't want to do it, then they can pay for a place to do it. Okay? They can pay for a private therapist. They can pay for tutoring with some of these teachers that are sitting at home. Some of them have been furloughed. There's plenty of people out there that are going to be willing to provide services, guys. If the school won't do it, the school just needs to pay for it. But some of you, if this is happening to you, then this is a perfect opportunity for you as well to recover your services that you lost from April, May, and potentially through the summer, when the school had the opportunity to start up in-person assessments, which the superintendent said that could resume back in June. That could resume in June. A lot of schools chose not to do it. They chose to kick the can into the fall. Those are choices. So I don't feel bad for any of them when James Galini comes knocking. Okay? So, okay. What I wanted to say at the very end is this contact tracing could potentially pose an issue with some of these schools in closing classrooms and quarantining people for 14 days, because that's a real possibility, unfortunately. Now, what Dr. Mackey, the state superintendent in Alabama, was saying is that they sort of had a unwritten formula that they were using during flu season, that if any class or if any school had a rate of positive flu around 20%, then they would close the school down for 4 days. And that was 20% of, I guess, staff, student population. That was sort of the unspoken rule of how they would deal with flu, okay? And that's the best example we have, guys, going back in how we deal, because this COVID thing is a new one for us, or at least the virulence of this particular coronavirus. But, the 20%. Now, is it going to be that way for COVID? Well, no. We've already seen, them willing to shut down places for one person. So in that regard, I am not necessarily disagreeing with what I would consider clusters, meaning that you have a specific group of students or teachers that are around each other during the majority of that day. Now, why is that? Because if let's say somebody tests positive, and guys, when I say test positive, I'm not talking about, anybody that's even symptomatic. I mean, one of the things that absolutely puzzles me is that I've never seen a situation to where you have to go out and get a test for them to even tell you you're sick. All right? We're all going out and getting tested because it helps with the data. But it doesn't necessarily, we have a high rate of number of people that are showing up as just asymptomatic, meaning that they don't even know that they had it, don't even know if they had the antibodies. But they're testing positive. Now, with some of these tests, I mean, hell, Connecticut, a health department put a warning label on the most popular COVID testing kit because they ended up discovering that they were getting an unacceptably high false positive rate, meaning that people were showing up positive that didn't have it, and therefore skewing and exaggerating the numbers, which of course the consequence for getting a false positive is they put healthy people under quarantine for 14 days. But it's also inflating these numbers unnecessarily and giving us bad data. And most of the states have ordered this particular test. And if you want more information about it, you can Google Connecticut Health Department. I forgot the name of the particular test, but that test was fast-tracked. FDA approval fast-tracked because we simply didn't have enough tests globally. I'm not picking on the United States. In fact, we're doing a much better job with the population that we have. We have a big population, guys. So to sit there and read news reports and go, oh, but Denmark, look, they did so well. There's 500 people in Denmark, guys. It's just not that difficult in some of these places. If you overlay the United States over Europe, I mean, it's insane how big our country is and how many people we have, and the success rates that we have with the sheer number of people that we've tested in such a short amount of time. And of course, the more people you test, the more positives you're going to end up having. It's just going to happen. My question is, how many of those happen to be false positives because we have imperfect testing instruments and inaccuracies in how those tests are given? The things that matter to me is what is the resulting and corresponding death rates. And those aren't climbing as fast as they were in April. And I credit our medical community for that, because we are saving more people, and we are saving them because we have learned so much. We have the greatest medical system in this world. We do. So that's a positive. I applaud that, but I'm not too bent out of shape about the number of. I mean, it just is logic. You test more people are going to show up positive. I also understand the inaccuracies of these tests. I've read the labels on LabCorp tests of this nature, and it says right there on the label that there's a high risk of a false positive, and it provides for you the legal waiver explaining what could potentially be the damaging effects on you for getting a false positive results. It could result in loss of income because you are forced into quarantine, when in reality you're not sick at all. Now, why do they put that on the label? So that you can't sue LabCorp for a false result and then the resulting loss of income. All those things have to be taken into consideration. But like I'm telling you, the real, I guess, potential danger in my view is about all of this is how militant some of this contact tracing is going to be. We don't know that yet. I don't agree with it necessarily, because we have never done this kind of contact tracing, and I just don't want it to become a new normal to where people developed contact tracing apps and now they need a reason to make money for their investors. Okay, because at that point, guys, we're done as a society. If we're going to be contact tracing everything, flu, the cold, whatever, then I don't see how a business can stay afloat, and I don't see how anybody could ever leave their home. I mean, but understand that there's a lot of businesses out there trying to gain steam, trying to sell a product in the form of apps, trying to get state governments on track with these apps. It's just no different than our for-profit prisons. There are prisons out there that are there, they're corporations, they're there to make a profit. What do you think that they need in order to make a profit? They need more criminals. So what do you think that they're after? I mean, they're out there to sit there and lobby for more laws, stupid laws, more people put in prison, when we have the highest prison population in the free world. So please keep that in mind, that when people make products, they want to make money off those products, which means that they will perpetuate whatever they need to perpetuate in order to make that profit. And do we really want that? Do you want to live your life like that for the rest of your life? And for your children, it's just nothing but fear can't go anywhere anymore because we're contact traced, because we're scared to look at our shadow. We're scared of the very, 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 very low risk of school shooters, for example. I mean, it just is insane how we have been fed fear in this country. And as adults, we can't do that to our kids, guys. We won't know the damaging effects of what the last few months have done for years. This is definitely going to mark a generation. And what's going to be interesting is how we as the adults are viewed in this situation. And it's not going to be good. It shouldn't be good. I mean, I'm very disappointed in us. We can do better than that. Far more responsible and controlled in our responses, but we haven't been. So please think this through as you are making your choices, that there's no such thing as baby FAPE, half a FAPE, stank FAPE, little FAPE. Okay, there's only FAPE, guys. You get to make a choice, but understand that if that choice is something other than what is required to provide a FAPE, then at that point, you're the one diminishing your child's right to a free and appropriate public education, not the school system. Now, at the same time, if the school system is only providing limited options, but yet this is FAPE, then at that point, it's the school system impeding your child's right to a FAPE. There is a difference. Please understand the difference in the analysis that you need to make. And you may sit there and go, and the school may sit there and tell you it's just for 9 weeks. It could be for 4 weeks. It could be for 6 weeks. Don't allow the Jedi mind trick because your kid hasn't had services since March. I mean, I'm talking about tangible services. And many of you, distant learning was a disaster. So, don't sit there and allow them to wipe that from the memory banks, especially when they had the opportunity to do some in-person services in the summer, and they chose not to. Okay?